Hi there, Chris here with another fresh tip for you all. In this video we are going to continue our look at painting the Primaris Outrider from the INDOMITUS box set. So we've already worked on the armor, we've already worked on the exhaust, the tires and everything like that, so let's get back to working on the Marine himself. To get us started, we're going to use some Abaddon Black, some Incubi Darkness, and we're going to add just that. We're going to mix these roughly a 2 black to 1 Incubi. And with this color, I'm simply just going to go through the model and reestablish basically where we had begun laying some highlights. Now, when we had worked on the armor of the bike itself, we were working on the Marine as well, and I wasn't 100% behind what I had done there, and I also never painted the helmet and missed a bunch of things because I was going over the entirety of the model, and so I just basically decided, let's just reestablish these highlights and build this all back up. So, and of course, also when I had laid down the gloss of the non-oil, it had hit a few points on the model, and this was an opportunity here to clean up some of those areas. So basically, this is not kind of a do-over, but just really kind of refining, essentially. And with this layer here, it is mostly black. It has got quite a bit of Incubi Darkness, and so I'm laying this in some of the areas to create some of those darker tones before the highlight, but also I'm laying it on some areas like, for example, the shin guard and the knee pad. I'm laying it over the majority of those areas. Again, there's a fair amount of Incubi Darkness in there, but it's not really that visible, as it were. We're going to add a drop of Ushabti bone to this to begin our highlighting process, and I really like this color that it comes out as the warmer tones of the Ushabti mix really in a fun way with the Incubi Darkness, giving us this really kind of almost a desaturated gray, but it's not quite a proper gray. It actually has a bit of a warm quality to it. I'm not 100% sure what you would call this, but it's kind of close to almost like Mechanicus gray, but darker is really where it's at, kind of thing. And it's a really fun color, and with this I would definitely recommend it. Probably more like a 1:1 type of ratio, 1 black, 1 Incubi, 1 Ushabti bone, and begin laying in these fine highlights. Now, we're not laying in big highlights here, and we are doing a bit of edge highlighting as we work our way around. And of course, if you do make a little boo-boo here and there, you can always come back in with the previous step and lay that in beside or refine that highlight. Especially some points there I end up hitting some areas just a little too broad on the highlight, and I do come back in with the previous color and refine that edge a little bit further just to sharpen it up a bit. And that's something you can do at any point. A lot of times in these examples, you can just refine these, go back a step, especially when you have your color mixture on your palette. We're going to use some Abaddon Black, Incubi Darkness, and Ushabti Bone, and I believe this is where we're going to go with a 1:1:1, I do believe. It's actually probably maybe a little more Incubi, or Ushabti Bone than it is the other two colors, just because I am working this as a highlight color. And with this, we are just simply going for corners and high points and things of that nature. I'm trying to be very deliberate as I'm working the color around. And some of the areas are kind of tricky to get into because this guy is fully assembled, and we really didn't do him as a sub-assembly, and I just really didn't feel like it was going to be kind of a pain to do, and I just didn't really feel like it, time. So you can see we're just simply laying the color down at any of the typical high points. If you've ever worked on Marines before, just really kind of following the edge. The key here is, of course, when painting black armor, not to overdo the highlighting. And of course, when you start working in brighter colors like this, you definitely want to maintain being deliberate as you apply the paint and highlights, and go for very sharp highlights if you can. So if you've got a nice brush that comes to a nice fine point, you may want to thin the color down just ever so slightly so that you can work some of these areas. Again, you can see it's just really just an edge highlight that I'm applying all over the model, various armor phases. I'm not worried about the shoulder pads at the moment because I am going to do this guy as a Black Templar, and so those shoulder pads are going to get colored white, and the trim I left untouched because I was going to apply something to the shoulder, or the trim of the shoulder pad. And so really it's just, carefully picking out little edges here and there as we work our way around, trying to be very deliberate. Next, we're going to come in, we're going to add a little bit more Ushabti bone. So this is roughly a 1:1 to 2.1 or 2. Just a little bit more Incubi Dark, Ushabti bone in this mixture. I think I grabbed just a little bit heavier dollop onto the areas here. And this is just really just corners and things of that nature. It's really not terribly complicated. You may want to thin the paint down with a bit of water just to help with flow. But otherwise, it's pretty straightforward. Just going for just corners, tiniest little spots on the knee pad, things like that. On these little pads on the feet, I'm just catching just the forward portion. Now, see that one part on the toe there was just a little bit broad of a highlight there that I really wasn't crazy about. So I do go back and correct that. And I basically just go back to the first color and thin it down to a glaze, and then just push that color and recede it just a little bit further. Next, we're going to come in with some Abaddon Black. We're going to add some Alamian Medium to this. It's about 2 drops, really thinning the color down. And we're just going to glaze and clean up some of our previous steps. And as I'm glazing with this color, I'm pushing it up to the high points because a lot of our highlighting scheme that we've done on this has been pushing the color downwards, getting brighter towards the bottom portion of areas. And this is also an opportunity where I will apply black onto some of the areas, clean up some of the spots like around the guns or the metal, or where the shade wash might have hit into other areas. And so I just go through and basically clean up those stuff. That's good English. Celestra Gray is next with a generous amount of water in the bristles just to thin the color out. I mix it into the entire dollop of paint, and then here I'm going to apply this over the shoulder pad. Now you will notice that my brushstroke currently here on this shoulder pad, and the orientation in which I'm looking at it, is an up-down kind of motion, or if we're looking at the shoulder pad head-on, it's kind of a left-right kind of thing. But either way, whatever way you start on your brushstroke, be mindful and stay consistent with that brushstroke on that surface. So if we're applying it in a left-right motion, be consistent on how you're doing that in this first layer. Because we have the color thinned out, we are going to have to apply more than one layer, but because we want to lay a nice smooth base coat down, that's exactly what we're going to do. So once that first layer is dry, I'm going to apply the next one in the opposite direction. So if it was left right, this is going to be up down, or vice versa, whichever way. Of course, the color is still thinned out, and all I'm using is a bit of water to thin the color out. And you can see here, so I'm just applying the color. You remember that on that shoulder pad, it was a left-right type of motion. Well, this time it's an up-down type of motion. And this is going to help you build a nice smooth base coat. And this is how I apply base coats. And that's essentially what we're doing to this area, because there really isn't that much paint on that surface. So I'm not really worried about laying heavy amounts of paint. And there's not a lot of detail on a big curvature like this, so I'm not too worried about laying down a decent amount of paint. Once that layer is going to be dry, we're going to apply a third layer, and it's going to basically be like our first layer. So it's going to, on that shoulder pad, I'm going to go up, down, and basically, again, you just alternate the brush strokes. You're essentially creating a lattice on that surface, and that creates a nice smooth finish. Now, because you're working with the paint in the thinned out consistency, it is going to lay on very thin, but that's good because that allows us to build a nice smooth surface onto that area. Because again, when we get to finishing this, that's going to help us in the long run, and you should always want to build a smooth base coat. Oathwren Gray is next. We're going to use a generous amount of water to thin the color out, and I'm basically going to apply this in a thick highlight, not a thick highlight, but a broad highlight, I should say. Like, you can see how broad it is right there. Around the entire perimeter of the shoulder pad. Now, I don't quite show it on that shoulder pad, but on this shoulder pad I'll show it. That basically we're just going to follow the outer edge of that shoulder pad. And because the Black Templars, it's a white shoulder pad. I'm going to add a little bit more water here. I'm going to basically take a little bit of paint, break this down to a glaze, and then I'm going to push the color towards the high point on the shoulder pad. And it's going to take probably about, I think it was about 3 or 4 glazes I do, just to create a transition on that shoulder pad. And as you can see there is a slight gradient. And of course you can refine that, and you could also just feather it or wet blend it or what have you, but I just decided to glaze it just for giggles. White Scar is next. We're going to slap a little bit onto our palette, and we are going to try and do a nice fine little highlight here into the corner. And that is it for the white. That is as much white as we're going to lay down. Now we could glaze a little bit of white building into that intensity on that corner, but I didn't really feel it was necessary. I think this pretty much gets the point across as far as building up that highlight and making this shoulder pad look like a white surface, which, indicative of Black Templar. Balthazar gold with some medium, and basically this is just going to mix this in a 1-to-1 with the medium, and I'm going to apply this all over the shoulder pad. And one thing when using the lamine medium is that because it finishes matte, the metallic is actually kind of dull when you apply to a smooth base coat. So what I did was I basically did one final layer with just a bit of water, Balthazar gold, and that's how I get a nice lustrous gold on that surface. But that is going to do it for part 1 of this. Stay tuned for part 2, where we'll finish off this Marine's armor. Big thank you to all my patrons. Without their support, these videos would not be possible. If you're considering Patreon support, click the link in the description below, and you'll be helping me out tremendously, and it helps keep these videos happening, and it keeps the lights on and all that. So huge thank you. Take care of those brushes. They will take care of you.